Okay, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to continue with our journey in Angular material, and I'm going to start this video with showing you my favorite thing in Angular material, and that is the table component. We'll talk about how we're getting data to the table in this example here, and then in the future I plan on doing different things to this table, like adding pages easily to the table, and the user can also select how many rows they want per page, that kind of thing. But we're just going to show the basic table in this video and also talking about where I'm getting this fake data that I'm using and make it more of like a real world example, if you will. So this might be a good one for you to follow along. And if you don't typically follow along, maybe this is the one you do. And I already have some of the table created just because it's a lot of, in my case, I just copy and paste from the material website that Angular has, but we'll go over what's going on in the background, and I think it'll be very useful for you. So if you like this kind of stuff, don't forget to hit subscribe. I just come on here and I share things as I learn them, and if that sounds interesting to you, yeah, really would appreciate it. But let's talk about where I'm getting some fake data. So maybe I should just show you what I have so far. Right now, I have this table, and you can see that I actually do have some data. In fact, I think there's 200 items that it's showing right here, 200 rows, and I didn't make this data up. This actually came from a fake API on this website right here, this JSON placeholder.typicode.com, and then they have a fake to-do list API which you can query, and in this URL we are just grabbing every single to-do item. We're not filtering. So I think I can put a 1 at the end of that URL and it'll just return where ID equals 1. But if we remove that and just get the to-dos, it'll give us every single one. There's 200 here. So I'll actually, if I do remember, I'll place this URL in the description if you want to use this as well, which I recommend, because likely that's what you're going to be doing in the real world. You're going to be querying some API, grabbing that data and making a table out of it. And that's what I did here. So this is our data, and let's refresh if you don't remember how calling web services works in Angular. So I have this service that I created and I called it web.service. And the first thing I did is I created an interface called to-do, and it holds every single property that each element gives us in this JSON. So we have a user ID, we have an ID, a title, and a completed. And if we look, that's exactly what my interface is. The user ID are both numbers, and then title and completed are strings. And then in the app module, I brought in the HTTP client, and then I created this method called getToDos, and it's going to return an observable of type to-do list, and it's just going to return a to-do list when it calls this API URL, which is that to-dos. Okay, so now I can inject this service into, in our case, my app component TypeScript, and in the constructor, and we can reference this getToDos method to grab us that data for this Angular material table. And if this was really fast and you're still confused, I do have a video where we went through the Angular Tour of Heroes tutorial together. You can go check out this Create a Quick API for our Angular app or the actual part 2. Both of those should teach you what I basically just glossed over. So feel free to go check those out. And so if we look at my app component TypeScript, I have a property called data, and its type is a to-do array. Remember that to-do is the interface, and right off the bat, it's just an empty array. And then I also have a property called columns to display, and we'll see why that's necessary. And right now, I just have one column in our table that I want to display, and that is the title. So like I mentioned before, I just injected the web service that I created into the constructor here and into this class, and then I call it in the constructor and I say set this data, so this equal to whatever this getToDos method returns in the web service. And then I also display it in the console. So if we go and look and I bring up F12, we can see that there's an array of 200 items, and as I would expect, each one we can expand and show all of those details. So that's all the data part. And now we can go ahead and look at what does the HTML actually look like. And so a lot of this was actually copy and pasted. So not only will I put this JSON placeholder dot type of code, the fake API for you, I will also link this table component and Angular material. And here is where you can grab the templated table HTML for Angular. And you can go through and change it as necessary with your data. So I was editing this video and I noticed I forgot to mention you do need to bring in the mat table module, which you can find in the API tab like we've been doing with the other components on the material website. And you'll also need to add that module to the imports array in order for this to compile and know what that mat table is. But let's just talk about what each part is doing. So we have the overall table, and we say this is a material table, and we set the data source property with this property binding equal to data, which, if you remember in the app component, it's just a list of to-do. And then next, we want to define how our columns are going to be displayed. And so I have an ng container, and I give the mat column definition a name. And in our case, it's going to be the same name, and it will have to be the same name as the ID of your data. So remember, title is the ID that we're displaying. And then I go ahead and I define the header of the column. So I'm just going to name this title. So if we look at the application, this is the column header. It just says title. And then I'll also define the data of this column. And what this part is saying, it says, let this particular item in this list of data, and we're going to call it element. So let element, and then we're going to display element.title. And after we go through the rows next, I'm actually going to go ahead and add another column so we can go through this together, just so you get more understanding of what's going on. But at the very bottom of the table, we're going to go ahead and define the table rows. And here they're asking for, okay, for the header row, which columns are we displaying? And that comes from this columns to display list that we defined in our TypeScript. So I named it columns to display, and right now we only have one element in here, but we will add another one. And then for the rest of the rows where it's actually showing the data, I'm going to say for each row, display it, and here's the columns again that we're going to display for the actual data. And here this name is completely arbitrary, so if I just name this row, let row, and I saved it, it'll compile, and then if we go back, you can see it still shows the same data. Basically, we just have to say, we want to show every single row in that data collection, in that list of data. So that might have been confusing, and what I want to do in this video is to expand upon this, and I want to show another piece, or maybe multiple pieces of this data besides just the title. So maybe we also want to show the ID. So we'll start with that and maybe add more from there if we decide that's necessary. So I'm just going to copy this whole definition for the title, and I'm going to put it in front of the title for the ID. So the mat column definition, I'm just going to name ID because that is the name or the key, I guess. So ID. And then this is what the header is going to read. So instead of title, we want it to read ID. And then let element, that's going to be, this is going to be the same as it was for the title. So we're just going to grab that particular element in the list. Instead of showing element.title, we're going to show element.id. And so I'll save, but if we look, it will not show up fully. You might be asking, why is that? That's because we didn't add ID to the columns to display. So it's still continuing to display only the columns that are in this list. And notice that even if we define this column here, it doesn't matter as long as it's not in this columns to display. So maybe you can go ahead and define every single column, and then this can be dynamic to what columns you want to display and add to that list or remove from that list as you need to. But I want to add ID to that columns to display, so we'll add to this list and then we'll add ID. So I'll compile again, and now if I pull it up, it should show you both. And notice that columns to display is actually also how it is arranged. So title was first in that list, and then ID was second. So maybe I want ID to be in front. So I'm actually going to cut that and put it in front of title. And now we don't need this comma back here anymore. So I'll save that, compile it, and now ID will be in front of title. So lastly, let's add one more column just to make sure you guys hopefully are understanding what I'm doing. Once you make one definition for the column, it's pretty easy to continue to add more. So let's go ahead and add completed next. And since we're already here, I'll just put completed in this columns to display list. And once again, that'll be the only thing I'm changing in the TypeScript. And now let's go back and let's copy one of these definitions. So I'll just put it right here. And then the column def is going to be completed. Okay, and the header is going to say completed. And element.title is going to be element.completed. And we'll save. And let's go look at our table. At the very end, it should say completed, true or false. So if you think about the alternative, what would the alternative be to using the material table? It would be creating a table in HTML, and each row would be a ng4 directive, and you would have to go through all of these different steps, or you could easily just use one of these Angular material tables and do it this way, which I think is a lot more dynamic. And in the future, I want to show you, okay, well, this is a lot of data for one page. What if we want to split it up in pages of 10 or 20 or 50? And we can go to the bottom and choose which page we're looking at. So that'll be in the next video. Hopefully you're looking forward to that. And thanks for watching. Really do appreciate it. Hope to see you in the next one.